CTV News with Carlyle Fiset.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us for a special edition of CTV News. We recently launched a new series on our website called Leading London, and tonight we're bringing you highlights from those conversations with London's community leaders. We'll hear from Dr. Alex Summers, Medical Officer of Health for the Middlesex London Health Unit, Sarah Campbell, Executive Director for Arcade Street Mission, Andrea Topham, the Chief Executive Officer at Youth Opportunities Unlimited, as well as Rachel Peake, the Artistic Director for the Grand Theatre. First, though, my one-on-one interview with Mayor Josh Morgan.
I want to start by just addressing the fact that it is an election year. You are seeking re-election, a second term, and I imagine it's because you've had just so much fun through these first 4 years.
Well, I mean, it has been a lot of fun. There's been a lot of serious issues to tackle, a lot of opportunities that our city has had. But, you know, I've watched city government for many years, been involved for more than a decade now. And, you know, it's been since 2010 that a mayor's even run for re-election in the City of London. And when I think about that and the type of work we do, I can't imagine trying to contain, you know, all of this into one term. When you think about the work on homelessness or housing or economic growth and development, you know, it takes some time to lay the groundwork and then really execute. So, you know, I think there's still a lot of work to do. I think my colleagues and I have set the city in a number of directions that are now starting to show results, and you know, we want to keep it on that path.
When it comes to laying the groundwork, as you say, a lot of that came from your platform 4 years ago, and I thought maybe we could start there in terms of the key points that you had identified.
Sure.
One of the top ones, mental health and addictions. Are you satisfied with the progress? I know as recently as September there was a report from City Hall about a 19% increase in the number of Londoners living on the streets right now. In terms of progress, what are you seeing?
Yeah, first off, there's been a 25% increase across the province, 19% in the City of London. And so why have we bucked the trend a little bit, even though we're a fast-growing city and we, you know, with more population growth than average, you'd expect we'd be higher. Well, we've instituted a number of programs over the last number of years that is actually helping. Now, here's the challenge. It's very difficult to see that.
I was going to ask, do you think Londoners see that progress?
No, I don't. And you can't see it because I'll tell you this. I said this at my State of the City address. In the past 3 years, we have permanently housed, taken people off the street and permanently housed 1,500 people. Those 1,500 people, if you walk downtown or in Old East Village or look in parks or doorways of businesses, you don't see them anymore because they've moved from the streets into stable permanent housing. But we've seen this flood of homelessness across the province increase. 25% is a significant number. And so although we've helped a lot of people, there's still more people falling into homelessness than not. And often people will say, well, you had, you know, about 1,900 people on the list, now it's over 2,000. They're not the same people on the list. And I think people forget that. So people are going through the system. People are coming off the streets through the programs we set in place, and they're getting into stable housing, but people are also falling into it. That's why the advocacy that we have at the provincial national levels is really critical, because no one city will solve this issue alone, but cities can innovate, they can put new programs into place, they can take and help people in many different ways, and that's what we're doing in the City of London.
A lot of talk there about government and support from other levels, but there are agencies that do a lot of the, most of, if not all the work on the front lines. I've sensed a bit of friction there from a lot of the representatives from those agencies, Arcade Street Mission, for example, bringing their issues to council lately. What is your sense of the relationships between City Hall and the people who are providing these services to Londoners on the street?
First off, I always think there's going to be friction between council, because council and agencies, because any councillor can bring any motion to any committee. Whether or not it passes, it can cause a lot of, you know, angst and turmoil, because, you know, it can signal a possible change, whether it happens or not. I would say the relationship between our staff and agencies who are serving the community is excellent. You know, there's day-to-day work happening. There's never been more coordination between agencies, the city, police, land ambulance, hospital systems than we've ever had before. But yes, from time to time, you know, there are motions that come before council that can create tension. But the people working in the space, each and every day, you know, that's like a really tough job. Like I went out and did outreach work and visited encampments the past summer with a couple of different teams, and you know, it's really tough to go out there to know people, to know that they're suffering, to know that they haven't found a path to housing yet, and to know that it might take some time, that on a day-to-day basis every day can be exhausting work. And so, it's not just about, is there any tensions? It can be frustrating and tiring work working on the front lines of these issues in our city.
Not unrelated to that topic, but another pillar of your platform from 4 years ago was about housing and affordability.
Yeah.
The mantra from every level of government has seemingly been build, 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 just build housing as much as we can.
Yeah.
Where do you feel like London is in terms of satisfying the need?
Yeah, so I'll be frank, we went from not really great at this, probably pretty far at the bottom of the list for speed of getting permits through, to one of the top. And one of them recognized across the province. I'll tell you some of the things we've been able to do. Not only in my campaign did I say we need to build about 50,000 houses in the next decade. Council, subsequently after that election, made a commitment to the province for 47,000 new homes by 2031. So far, Council has done permissions for 51,000 homes, and we still have a year left to go in this term. That means we found a way to actually find pathways to being permissive on housing. Now, what
is that all City Hall can do? Because people can't live in permits.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. So we've got the part of the process that we control, and permits are not places, and pieces of paper, not homes in our city. And so what we've tried to do too is design incentive programs to get those permits moving into actual builds.
That seems to be where the tires are spinning at this point.
Yeah, I disagree. Actually, last year we had 5,400 permits pulled, which is 35% above our best year ever. In other words, we're getting people to actually pull permits. We met our Building Faster Fund target last year. I'm very optimistic about this current iteration of the program, and I think we found a pathway forward. And we've done it with innovative incentive programs. I brought forward the Office Residential Conversion Program. We've seen over 190 units created and 180,000 square feet of vacant office space converted into homes in the downtown core of our city. We've seen investment in the city like never before. Last year, construction value reached $2.7 billion in our city, which is $500 million above the highest best next year, which was the year before, in 2024. In other words, people are investing in our city and they're building in our city. We have the new tallest building in the city, and it's a residential tower, not a commercial tower in our downtown. And that signifies the change of downtown into a residential neighborhood as much as a commercial and entertainment and cultural district as well.
Is the future of London downtown more residential, or is there interest in bringing businesses back to those properties?
There's both. So not only do we want to see more businesses come back downtown, but we want residential development downtown. If you think about the history of London, we had major headquarters building a lot of office space over the history of our city, and they're not here anymore. And so to try to fill all of that back up, I just don't think is a realistic approach. We've got to convert some of it to residential, and that's what the Office of Residential Conversion Program does. But we've also got to be permissive on residential density downtown. The best way to support a downtown restaurant business, the market, create a vibrancy on the street, is putting up towers where people can live here, where they can walk out their front door and support local businesses, where they can walk out their front door, walk the streets, and create a sense of safety, security, and cultural vibrancy in our downtown core. And that will help support the businesses that we want to draw back down to the core as well. So we absolutely have to do both, and we've stabilized our office vacancy rate. We made a little bit of improvements, and then it kind of went back up a little bit, but we've taken 180,000 square feet of vacant office space off the market, converting it to residential. And I think we got to do more of that to get ahead of this issue.
The last pillar of your previous campaign platform I want to touch on, climate change in a greener London. I think the mobility master plan, transit falls under this category. LTC underwent a pretty major administrative overhaul last year. What is the direction for LTC going forward? What are the goals for a sustainable, I assume, and successful transit system in the city?
Yeah, so a sustainable and successful transit system in the city is about the mass mobility plan. It's not just about rapid transit or conventional transit, it's about automobiles, cycling, and cars. That's why the mass mobility plan sets forward a 25-year plan for all modes of transportation and the capital plans that need to support that. On LTC specifically, we'll receive a report this year on an audit of the government and review of the governance of that organization. We'll take the results of that audit, we'll set a new administrative direction for the organization, and then move forward from there.
What wasn't working in your mind at LTC?
What wasn't working was a disconnect between the direction the council wanted to go and the direction that the Transit Commission was headed. I mean, we were pushing to say, our city is growing, we need to see applications into assessment growth. And there was a disconnect between our city staff and Transit Commission to say, how do we actually apply for assessment growth? But we've worked through that and we've got assessment growth asks now in. Provision to industrial lands took way longer than we on council would have liked. And so, you know, we've streamlined this. I think we've come closer together and you know, we'll move forward together because transit's pretty important to the future of a fast-growing city.
Somewhat related to that, and this might be a question a bit about how the sausage is made, but when it comes to staff roles at City Hall and the relationship between staff, councillors, and the various agencies and organizations and arms of the City Hall, how do you feel about when a staff report comes forward? Do staff feel that they are respected and heard and that their contributions are valued when a staff report comes to a committee meeting and it is either rejected or sent back? Obviously, when that happens, I think there's a perspective that councillors going against staff creates a perception. At London City Hall, how do you feel about that process?
Well, first off, I'll be very clear from my position as mayor. I think we have phenomenal staff at the City of London, and I respect absolutely their professional expertise and the work that they do to bring reports forward. That being said, we might agree with staff 95, 96% of the time. That other 4% of the time is why you have a municipal council looking at it from a slightly different lens. It may not be from the technical perspective. There may be other pieces we want to bring into it. And so I've always said it's okay if council goes a different direction on these things. And we've done that often. But I think we've done so respectfully and recognizing the reasons that recommendation came forward. But when we integrate the community perspective and the other things that we have to put into our decision making, again, we agree with staff well over 90, 95% of the time. But in those times where we don't, I do think it's really important to be respectful about it, recognize why they're bringing forward the recommendations they are. I will admit, from time to time, there's been members of council who have perhaps not been the most gracious during the debates on this sort of thing. And, you know,
there's been an adversarial tone at times. I think that's fair to say.
Totally agree. Yeah, and that's something that, again, you've seen points of personal privilege or representations on behalf of staff saying, you got to say that a different way. You can't make it seem like staff weren't bringing forward the right information or were manipulating the process in any sort of way, because they're not. They're just trying to do a great job for the citizens of London, just like we are.
Shifting to policing and public safety, we've touched a little bit about that in our conversation about homelessness and addictions issues, because it's all connected, obviously. A substantial increase for the police budget under your watch, something you were a proponent of on that process. In your mind, are Londoners getting fair value for their investment in policing in this city? Yeah,
I'm glad you said it that way, because people talk about taxes, but taxes are investments. So what's really critical is, what did you spend the money on? And what did you get in return? So value is exactly the right word. So if you look at the last 2 years since we invested in the police, a system that was underinvested for decades, you know, we saw a 38% reduction in homicides, a 45% reduction in carjackings, 25% reduction in break-in enters, 64% reduction in motor vehicle thefts. The complaints against London police officers have gone down 70%, so service complaints are down. Priority 1 calls, so when you call the police, you expect them to come. Our response times were not good, right? Tier 3 response times were 80 hours. Like, that is days of waiting. We've lopped that down by 50%. It's now 40. On Tier 1, we're now down to 9 minutes before when you make the lights and sirens calls to getting there. Those are things that I'm really proud of. On traffic enforcement, which I hear a lot about, you know, we've never done more traffic enforcement than we have going back to before the pandemic. And that has led to a 50% reduction in motor vehicle fatalities on our streets. So, I mean, people can judge for themselves whether that's good value. To me, it is. And I'm pretty happy with the work that Chief Trong and his team have done to not only say, here's how we're going to spend the budget, to execute it really well and produce results. And his acceptance of accountability over this to say, not only am I going to do policing, I'm going to produce some data, and I'm going to share that publicly at board meetings, and I'm going to give that to City Council so that you know what you paid for. I think it's just a really responsible way to go. So I think we've got value for that investment. I mean, Londoners can judge for themselves, but those are some of the statistics that essentially we got through that investment.
And You brought up Chief Trong. He's had a contract extension. He'll be here through the rest of the decade, as I understand it. In the job that he's done, I'm hearing a pretty resounding endorsement on his role and his, I guess, credit that you're giving to him for those results.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, the chief is a transformative leader in the London Police Service, and not only has he produced results for Londoners from a public safety perspective, he's actually changed the way the organization works and functions. He's gone after the more complex crime that you see in a growing city. He comes from York Region. He's got experience with bigger city challenges. So when you talk about human trafficking, gun violence, gangs, organized crime, make no mistake, that exists in our city. We're a big enough city where that is a challenge that we have. And Chief Trong has reorganized this service to be able to meet those challenges head on. I don't think morale has ever been higher at the London Police Service, and that's always good for an organization. We're diverse.
A big investment in the police budget will do that.
Okay, well, it helps when you get proper equipment, proper training, and council's support of that was pretty critical. But we've also transformed the diversity of the organization, right? People have said policing has not treated certain populations and historically very well, not just in this city, but elsewhere. The chief has tried to tackle that head on. With the opportunity to hire new officers, we're hiring with more diversity than we ever have before. We have more women working in policing than we ever have before. The chief has taken that opportunity and not just gone the old ways of doing things, but actually said we can transform the organization if we go down this path.
I want to shift to a bit of a bigger picture conversation about the institutions in this city. Several of them have gone through what I would describe as a bit of a reckoning in recent years.
Yeah.
We talked about the changes that you've seen under Chief Trong at London Police, but when it comes to LHSC, legal woes there, Thames Valley District School Board, financial supervisor now in place there. What is your read, I suppose, on the changes, evolving nature of some of these institutions in this city, some of the biggest ones?
Well, I think it's a really difficult time for confidence in institutions, and that's what always worries me about when these kind of transitions happen. I do think it's important, right? I think it's important for when things have gone sideways or wrong, or there's been challenges in an organization, for that to be rectified, and I think that's what you've seen. You've seen the province intervene on a couple of those organizations to try to right either the financial ship or dig into some challenges that they perceive. When that happens, though, it casts kind of a shadow on, I think, every institution. That doesn't mean every public institution has those challenges or problems. Look at the City of London, right? From a financial perspective, we said a decade ago that we were going to dig in and find deficiencies. And not every organization did that, and it does take leadership at the top to say, we're going to have robust safeguards within our organization. We're going to look at all aspects of it, and we're going to have.
Is that something like when we talk about a lot of growth in having big city problems?
Yeah.
For example, institutions that have existed in London from when it was not the city that it is today. Is that a symptom of that?
Totally, yeah. Organizations have to transform in a fast-growing environment, and sometimes they can get away from you. But that's why I think what we've done at City Council is we've put safeguards and processes in place to say we are going to evolve and we are going to change.
Your time as mayor and going back years before, just your time in municipal politics have been under one government pretty much at the federal level and one government at the provincial level.
Yep.
Ideologically, a liberal and a conservative government, an Ontario conservative government though.
Yep.
So I'm curious about your perspective in navigating the liberal politics at the federal level and Doug Ford's government at the provincial level as someone who has to get stuff done while appeasing both of those levels.
First, I want to say that I think both levels of government have been partners for municipalities in multiple different ways. The Premier's been pretty clear about putting historic amounts of dollars on the table, whether that's for over $500 million for the hard hubs, whether that's the money he's put into infrastructure, the amount of investments that he's made available that we can access for housing enabling infrastructure has been never higher. I think municipalities, and I have the privilege of chairing the National Mayor's Caucus, the Big City Mayor's Caucus, the 23 largest cities in the country. I think municipalities have this really tremendously important role within the Canadian Federation of being that on the ground. We don't have parties. You know, does politics come in? For sure it does, but we see the problems and the solutions in a really granular way, because we're on the streets each and every day. And I think what we've taken upon ourselves to do is say, whether it's the provincial government or the federal government, whatever party's in power, sharing our perspectives on what we see, sharing what we feel are the solutions are, and being open to partnering with the government of the day to say, you're probably going to have your slant on these different programs. We're there for you to try to help make them the best programs they can. And when you made a decision, we're going to help you execute them as best we can. And I think Canadian cities have tried to do that. And that's what's put us in, I think, a really good position to have really positive relationships with multiple levels of government over long periods of time, particularly the City of London, right? I'm really proud of my relationship with the provincial and federal governments over the period. There's been different leaders at the federal level recently.
I was going to ask about going back to your last election campaign. You received endorsements from across the political spectrum.
Yeah.
I would describe you as someone who is maybe ideologically ambiguous.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? Is that intentional on your part?
I think I'm practical,
okay,
right? And so if there's problems and solutions, I don't really care if they're seen as left-wing or right-wing. I tend to go to where the problem is and then listen to the research, the experts, and then try to drive the solutions. And I'm willing to innovate, which means I'm not closed-minded to say I'm not willing to try someone else's perspective. I'm also not willing to fail at something, right? And I think that I've been criticized from time to time for trying to put programs forward and saying, well, that one didn't work out. Is that a failure? Well, yeah, sometimes it is, right? Because you're never going to find a new and better pathway forward if you don't try new things. You just do it with the proper controls and protections so that you mitigate your risk. So, you know, I think I'm a pragmatist and very practical. I try to innovate, and so where that lands me on the political spectrum, I think that puts me a little bit all over the map from time to time.
What is the impression you get from others? I was going to bring up your role at Big City Mayor's Caucus and just about how London relates to other cities in this country and whether or not our reputation has evolved that you've seen in how we are received in other places of the country.
Yeah, so I'm really glad you asked this question because I'm going to answer it from two perspectives. If you want me to answer it from inside the City of London, I would say I don't think I've seen a community where Londoners are as hard on themselves as anybody else is. We can accomplish pretty amazing things and then say, but why didn't we do this, right? Like we're always challenging ourselves in this, I think, really a way that really keeps our city moving forward, but in a way that we sometimes don't stop to celebrate the types of things that we've been able to achieve. And I think so Londoners are hard on themselves. And in our bicentennial year, I think, you know, let's step back for a moment and actually say, we got a lot of things we got to do, but let's celebrate some of the great things in the City of London. Outside the city, we have a phenomenal reputation. And it wasn't always that way, but it is very high right now. I don't think we've ever been more influential with our partners municipally, our partners at Queen's Park, our partners federally, than we have, because we've decided to lean in to those relationships and partner with them.
Kind of an open-ended question here, but is London missing anything in your eyes?
I actually describe London as a complete city when people ask me to describe it. So you could say we're missing an NHL team, or we don't have a professional baseball team, but we got a great hockey team, and we got a great baseball team, and we've got a great sports culture. Well, you don't have the Broadway-style theater. Well, we've got a great theater that has sold a record number of subscriptions, and we've got culture in our city. We also have beautiful natural heritage, right? We've got rivers, and we've got a whole lake, we've got a dam, we've got, you know, all of this beautiful natural landscape that is protected and people can take advantage of. And so, whereas other cities, say in the GTA, borrow from the city beside them, they're like, well, we're in Mississauga for this, we'll go over to Toronto for this, we'll go around to Hamilton for this. We got a little bit of everything right here.
I know I started off with it was a tongue-in-cheek remark about having so much fun in your first term, but I am genuinely curious about what you've enjoyed the most about your first 4 years as mayor.
I actually enjoy getting out and talking to Londoners, right? And so, I mean, there's the job, and I love the job, and the job can be, you know, really rewarding one days, super frustrating and very difficult the other days. But like, I do a lot of talking to youth. I go to a lot of schools. I go to long-term care homes. I go out and I talk and I listen to like a lot of Londoners, and like I love that part of the job. First off, it's a really good check-in to say, how are you doing on some of these issues? But second, you get to like all this stuff I said about us being proud of ourselves. When you go out into the community, you start to realize like there's some pretty amazing people doing some pretty amazing things that fly completely under the radar. And they're like everyday heroes out there who are just, there could be high school students doing a brand new recycling program at their school. And they're like, I designed this whole thing and now we have this, all across our school. And then the board is looking at spreading it out. Like that's pretty impressive to go out there and see. So for me, one of the favorite parts of my job is getting out in the community and actually talking to people and finding out what they're doing to make our city even better. That's not a lot of jobs you get to do that in so many different ways, and so it's one of my favorite parts of it.
I'm joined by Dr. Alex Summers, the Chief Medical Officer of Health for the Middlesex London Health Unit. Dr. Summers, thank you for being with us. I want to start off with what was a pretty significant event for the Health Unit in early March, a cybersecurity incident as it was described. Now, I understand your area of expertise is healthcare policy. You are not a tech expert when it comes to hacking or ransomware, so I just want to ask you, generally, what can you tell us at this point of what happened and what the Health Unit's response has been?
Like all public institutions in many places in Canada now, the risks of these type of cybersecurity attacks is real, and unfortunately we experienced one in March. What that meant is that we had to respond pretty quickly to get our operations up and running. Fortunately, we were able to make sure that we're continuing to serve our community within days, which is very, very fortunate. We're continuing to investigate that incident to fully understand the scope and the impact, but the good news is, as we speak, all of the Health Unit's operations are up and running as they would normally be, which is, I think, a real testament to some really good effort by our team.
Was it a bit of a wake-up call, your first experience in something like that, maybe the scale of just how big this threat is, as you mentioned, not just for your industry, but broadly right now?
Certainly, this is our first time as an organization dealing with something of this magnitude. Fortunately, we were prepared. We recognize that when it comes to cybersecurity attacks or cybersecurity incidents like this, it's not a question of if, it is a question of when. And so one of the things you have to do as an institution, as an organization, is be prepared for these things, not only from a security perspective, but critically from a recovery perspective. You want to get up and running as soon as you can after these events happened, which was really our focus when the event actually occurred.
What is your perspective on the current state of the provincial government's approach to health? I know their budget was, as we're recording this, just recently released. I imagine you haven't had a chance to dive into that just yet. But in terms of the direction that public health is going in Ontario and the provincial government's approach to it, criticism from health advocates that it is leaning more and more into privatization options. What do you think of that direction?
There are many different strategies that can be taken when designing a health system, and to be frank, I'm not a healthcare system design expert. I'm the public health guy. What I can tell you is that having access to available and effective healthcare services, including primary care, is critical, and that outcome is what I would want to see as a public health official in our region.
10 years ago, this job might have looked pretty different because something happened in 2020 that kind of changed everything, especially in your line of work. So I'm curious about when the pandemic broke out, you were second in command at this unit. Did you see what was going on kind of, that's all happening in real time from March 2020 to the years, I guess, afterward and the impact? What was that like from your perspective in watching what, you thought maybe the job might be to what it has become?
Being a public health physician or a medical officer of health through a pandemic is a remarkably unique, challenging, and privileged experience.
What I imagine you'd probably never want to do again.
No, it's a once in a career experience, you hope. I have obviously pretty vivid memories of early 2020, seeing the pandemic starting to emerge, and then as things really unfolded in March, a truly remarkable experience. For me, it really highlighted the critical role that public health plays in protecting the health of our community. It highlighted the critical role that all of us actually play in protecting one another. I mean, it was such a reminder that the health of you impacts the health of me, impacts the health of us. The pandemic really reminded us about that. I think it was a very exhausting experience, not only for us working in the field, but for our community on the whole. I don't think we've fully seen the long-term impacts of that pandemic on our communities and on all of us, even though I think many of us wish we don't have to think about it and hope to forget it as soon as possible, but the impacts are going to be long-standing.
It's fair to say you took over the top job with the health unit under, and I say top job at least on the medical side because there is a CEO position as well, but the turbulence of those circumstances, what was it like to take over that job, I would say relatively early in your career?
It was quite an experience to step into this medical officer health role, but it was in many ways a continuation of the work that I was already doing. And one of the things that made it amazing to be in leadership is that the tremendous work of the people within the health unit continued, and I am bolstered by their work each and every single day.
Can I ask what your working relationship was like with your predecessor, Dr. Chris Mackey?
Dr. Mackey provided me with so many opportunities. Under his leadership, the health unit certainly weathered and tackled the beginning of that pandemic and the depths of it, I think, with a really vigorous response. And yes, Dr. Mackey provided me with tremendous opportunities as I started my career, and I'm very grateful for him.
Can you elaborate then on maybe the workplace culture you were inheriting? There was his departure did leave under some controversy, for lack of a better term. What was the, I guess, environment you felt as you were taking over for him?
The health unit certainly was at a place as a result, certainly of the pandemic, where
stressful times.
Fair
to say.
Were exceptionally stressful, and yet through that, I think the thread of strength, unity, commitment to purpose, to protect and promote the health of this community was always there. And I was again very fortunate to take on the leadership challenges at the time because I was so supported by a wonderful group of people that I worked with and continue to work with, and what is, I think, a very strong and committed culture.
Medical misinformation is, it's always been a concern for people in the healthcare profession, but it's certainly been supercharged in the age of social media. The pandemic amplified it, certainly. We're starting to see the impact of artificial intelligence. So what is the health unit doing to ensure people in our region have access to accurate healthcare information?
Addressing misinformation and disinformation is a singular priority for public health agencies everywhere, and certainly for us in our region. It is anchored on being a source of trusted information. And so the number one thing that we need to do is continue to build trust, and not just through the ways in which we've often built trust, through coming and speaking on the news or through media releases, but through our day in, day out work with all the populations and all the communities and neighborhoods within our region. It's through that local, personal relationship building that we can build trust, which means that we're able to then communicate messages of science and fact to try and address mis and disinformation. The world as we know it is now full of information. For the longest time in human history, it was more of a challenge to find the information you need. Now it's around trying to make sense of all the information that is out there. And what the health unit aims to be is that source of truth, a source of trust that is able to try and find some clarity through the noise of all the information that is out there. And that comes through building trust, through really ensuring that people understand that we're there for them. That is our singular purpose. And my hope is that through that trust that we're able to help address that scourge of misinformation that we're experiencing.
How high does that work rank on your priority list?
Within the top three.
Top three, okay. Because my next question has to do with, specific to our region, measles has been, there's been a resurgence, more of a problem in other health units, around our region than Middlesex London specifically to say, but I'm sure there's at least concern watching those numbers go up elsewhere because they're so close to our community. What is your sense of the challenges there, and it's probably tied to a lot of this misinformation we've just been talking about, in getting a hold of something that, as a society, we thought we wouldn't have to worry about at one point?
One of the challenges facing Canada, Ontario, and the Middlesex London region is that things that were old are now new again, be it increasing rates of tuberculosis, syphilis, or measles. And so over the last couple of years, certainly we've seen a resurgence of measles within Canada. We've lost our elimination status with regards to measles in our country. The pathway to reducing the risk of vaccine-preventable diseases like measles is through building trust again, building those local relationships. We have to be ever diligent against these microbiological threats that we face. COVID reminded us of that. Measles reminds us of that. Legionella outbreaks remind us of that. We will never be in a post-infectious disease world. What we can do, however, is build a world in which the risk of those infectious diseases is as low as we can make it. And that's through confidence in vaccinations, making sure vaccines are available for people, making sure that we're continuing to support research initiatives around immunizations. These are key things, and at the core of it, though, is that relationship thing that I spoke about earlier. It's through trust.
I'm joined by Andrea Topham, the Chief Executive Officer for Youth Opportunities Unlimited. Andrea, thanks for being here today. I want to start off maybe just talking about the last few months. You are less than a year into your tenure in this position. I know you've come back to the organization, though, so maybe just walk me through what these last few months have been like in this new role for you.
Sure, yeah. I started back at YOU in August, and it has been outstanding, amazing, a bit of a whirlwind, lots of learning. I say that, it's like I've come home, but we've moved to a new home. So, it's still the same feel, still the same great culture, but we've grown so much. It's almost like a different organization in a way.
A lot of that has to do with the facility down on Richmond, breakdown town. Tell me a bit about that, it's early days still in that brand new facility. What's it been like to take over an organization that is coming into a space like that and really trying to make it home, as you describe it?
Right. Well, it's to do with Jones Place is the facility you're talking about, for sure. That opened a little bit over a year ago last month. We've also added our shelter since I've been here. We've added our shelter at Clarkside Road and our hub at London Health Sciences Centre. But as far as Jones Place is concerned, it's such a wonderful opportunity for young moms and young families. We've had several babies born. We have a young mom who's pregnant with twins at Jones Place right now. And it's just really what our community needed to support young people who may be experiencing homelessness, who may have been unhoused, with all of those wraparound supports around them. It's just a lovely, lovely space.
Can I ask about the issues that are affecting our community that lead people to rely on your services? And I know every individual obviously has a unique set of circumstances that leads them to your door. But in terms of the systemic issues, whether or not they're specific to London, that you're seeing, what are the first and foremost that come to your mind?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now is a growing amount of increased complexity in some of the barriers that young people are faced with. It's not just that perhaps they need to work on employment, which is something that we absolutely do. But before you can get a job, it's pretty hard to go to work if you don't have a place to live, right? So we're seeing, increase in unaffordability in terms of housing. We're seeing a lot more substance use. We're seeing multiple complex mental health concerns. And sometimes when all of those things are combined, it requires a community effort. And that's what we've been working on at Jones Place and across YOU and with our many community partners.
How does that look? Because, in speaking with leaders in similar spaces, when it comes to homelessness in the city, there's a perspective that's probably shared by our audience in terms of what's visible when it comes to homelessness. Is it maybe more nuanced and different for homelessness for youth in particular in the city?
Absolutely. I mean, of course, it's visible. We see it. We see it when we're driving to work. We see it when we're taking our kids to soccer games. And it's increasing, not just in London, but throughout the province, throughout the country, globally. With young people, I think the issue is, I'm not sure that it's more nuanced. I think each individual has a nuanced story. But I think with young people, the needs to house them safely are a little bit different. We're looking at breaking that cycle early to stop folks from being unhoused for many, many years. So when someone is chronically unhoused, then the acuity level rises and it becomes more difficult for them to gain stable and secure long-term housing. So that's what we're looking to do. There's also some more safety concerns. I mean, there's not more safety concerns, but youth are particularly vulnerable. So we want to make sure that they have safe places with the right types of supports wrapped around them that's going to suit their needs.
I'm with Sarah Campbell, the Executive Director for ArcAid Street Mission. For our viewers, you will be a familiar face if you watch our CTV newscasts regularly, because you are a public figure not only for your organization, but I would argue also for frontline agencies at large in this city. And I want to maybe start on with your role in the community for ArcAid Street Mission, maybe some misconceptions from the public. What do you do? What are the services you provide? And maybe what don't you do that some people think you should maybe be doing?
Sure. Well, I joined ArcAid Street Mission in 2020. The organization is 40 years old, so it's been around a long time. Historically, really, it's been known as a soup kitchen. And so up to 2020, the high number of meals that we delivered was about 120 meals in a day. Nowadays we deliver close to 1,000 meals every day through our own drop-in center at 696 Dundas, but also across 3 locations in the city that we operate. One is a shelter where people can stay up until they become housed or until they move to more permanent sheltering. And we say more permanent because that shelter is only funded through year-to-year funding. Right now, we've just been extended until 2027, March of 2027. So it's not a permanent shelter, and we can't say people can stay until they find home because we don't know if that will happen. And so, yes, ArcAid has evolved a great deal in a number of years, but, to your point, what is ArcAid's role within the sort of that broader system? And I think we're an organization that really longs to see every social service and agency thrive. We try to work in partnership with others and really highlight that the issues we're trying to address, like poverty and food security and community building, people coming together and being able to find a place to belong. And in this moment, it really has been homelessness, right? Because from the streets of London, there's just so much more homelessness on our streets than ever before. We're stepping into that space. And so I love to encourage other organizations to be their best by supporting them. And ArcAid has a vision of a community in which all people are beheld, beloved, and belong. So, that's a very broad mission statement. So to your point, what do? We do community with people. That's the main thing that we do. We do it through meal services and outreach programming, houses. We have a couple of housing programs that are recovery-based, people who are through a recovery program and moving on to permanent housing from there, and the sheltering and emergency responses, which, lots of people, I think, associate the ARC with winter response, opening beds in the winter, those emergency services.
Can I ask to what extent then there's a faith aspect? Can I ask to what extent that influences your services?
Well, certainly. The ARC is a historically Christian faith-based organization and still has those roots. I say that we're grounded in love, and that source comes from outside of our organization, from our spiritual background as an organization, and yet we seek to share the good news through how we serve together. And so it's a great place for churches and faith communities across the city to come together to do what churches are meant to do, which is to serve the poor and feed the hungry. And so we do have actually over 600 volunteers as an organization that help to provide these services. And our faith background is really largely in service. And of course, we invite people to connect to churches through our organization as well.
I am joined by the Artistic Director for the Grand Theatre, Rachel Peake. Rachel, thanks for being here. Let's start off with your background. I know you're originally from Saskatchewan, the prairies, and a lot of your career obviously was out in Western Canada before your move to London. So what was the appeal of taking the role here in London to move east?
Well, the Grand Theatre is well known across the country, so it definitely has always held a bit of magic for me. I first sort of came to know about the Grand when I was interning at the Stratford Festival, and I came and met with then Artistic Director Susan Furley and got to see how beautiful the building is, how it's situated in the city. And I think a lot of Londoners don't realize how significant the Grand is in the Canadian theatre landscape, sure. How well thought of it is by theatre artists.
I am curious about the Stratford effect. I know you have a bit of a background there with some of your professional experience. Does the Stratford lineup influence at all your creative direction in what you're looking for? Is there maybe an element of trying to offer something different than what's in Stratford? How do you approach that?
It's definitely something we think a lot about. We know that we share audiences with the Stratford Festival because they are so close. I would say that, we usually announce our season before they do. And so this year we're in this really accidental but kind of delightful situation where we're currently, we're doing The Importance of Being Earnest, and the Stratford Festival is doing it this summer. So they're very different productions. So it's really exciting, I think, for audiences to experience the two versions. I mean, I think that we do share a bit of an overlap in terms of our programming priorities. I would not do a show that the Stratford Festival had done in, the last few years, because I think I don't want to. I want to bring new things to the audience. So if there's an audience that feels like, oh, I've just recently seen that, then I wouldn't enter into that. But I also think that there's only a little bit of overlap. We still have very different things that we do, and I
Shakespeare on the Spree stage at any point?
I mean, we did do, in my first year, we did As You Like It, a Beatles mashup. So it was something that hadn't been seen in Stratford, but it was a Shakespeare play. What
are you most excited about for I guess maybe even just the next year and into the future for the Grand Theatre?
Well, we have a lot of really exciting things happening next year. We have some inaugural programs. We're doing our first year of the Grand Laughs comedy series. We've got a couple of new initiatives that are going to be announced a little bit later this year. We're celebrating the 125th anniversary of the building, which is pretty remarkable. It's, arguably the most beautiful theatre building in Canada. So I think there are a lot of things to be really excited about. And then, our programming on the Spree stage, I think is it just keeps getting better and better with these incredible artists we've got coming through, and some really incredible innovation next season as well. So I think, the future looks bright is a simple way of saying it.
And that's it for us. Thanks for watching. The full-length versions of these interviews can be found on our website, ctvnewslondon.ca. For all of us at CTV News London, I'm Carlyle Fiset. Have a good night.